In terms of low establishment, we've got low establishment because we've had lower call volumes and we've had a significant reduction in the amount, particularly of commission services that we've taken on. At the same time, we've got in the 111 services essentially ring-fence groups of staff that we are dedicating to deliver those very strategically important services. So low establishment in itself should have been comparable to what we needed in order to deliver the services, but then we do have the other factors, and I think your point, Tim, of a balance sheet approach is a good one. We have probably the equivalence of that. So what we monitor on a weekly basis is something which we've called the CAPE. Everything in NHS Direct has to have an acronym, of course, which is a multidisciplinary team. Trish is part of that call every week, where we review what the key performance indicators are, which have the impact upon being contributors to extra capacity. So things like overtime, excess hours, and all of those sorts of things, and also those things which are the reducers of capacity that's available. And the key reducers, as per the paper, are average handling time, so the number of calls per hour that each member of staff can do, the handoff rates between our nurse advisors to our health advisors, and for that matter, our health and symptoms checkers to our nurse advisors as well, and then absence, whether it be through sickness or through other factors. And we do monitor that on an everyday basis. So we extrapolate that into the number of staff that would have delivered, and what therefore the gap is between the number of staff that we should have had and the capacity that we didn't have. And I'm happy to share with the board a copy of the what's now been turned into the performance improvement plan tracker, which has those factors broken down.
Renette, why don't you build that into the
next week,
next
month,
so we can see how you do that.
Yeah. The other question then was about the take-up of overtime. So we do have a lower establishment, we have less people, we have the equivalent of 277 less FTE on the front line now than we did at this same time last year. And the take-up, so therefore you've got a lower base of people that you want to have the overtime taken up from. Overtime take-up was about an eighth of what it was this time last year. Despite the fact that we had the same incentives and other factors in place. So we think that is partly to do with people working hard enough during their contracted hours that they now don't want to give us extra overtime hours. But that is a key consideration for our planning going forward. And in fact, what we're now actively recruiting is more flexible capacity, particularly agency nurses, who are the equivalent of overtime, if you like, for our staff, that we can turn them off at short notice and increase their hours as we need. But where last year we did use agency nurses, we were very much at their behest as to whether they provided us with any hours. This year what we've got in place is a framework agreement where there are KPI penalties with our provider Hayes if nurses do not provide the number of hours that we ask of them. I'm not saying it all over again now the mic's come. And then finally, I think there was a question about clinical priorities.
Fewer targets.
So again?
Whether we have too many targets.
Too many targets, thanks Trevor, yes. So, and this is something that we've spent quite a lot of time discussing on our daily situation. We met 3 times a day during the busy periods to talk about. We did absolutely prioritise all of those patients who had the most urgent and less urgent issues. But that meant that we were providing a much poorer service to those patients who we had prioritised as non-urgent. And there is a school of thought, we all agree with this, that it's actually the non-urgent patients that perhaps get the most benefit out of using NHS Direct, because there is few other places that they can go. And so that's what was meant by that comment in terms of by holding on to the P1s and P2s, the P3s were drifting longer and longer away because there was no resources that got to them. Now, of course, the answer is to have the right amount of capacity at all times to deal with all three, but the staff did find themselves constantly juggling how much resource can you put onto the P3 queue so that doesn't get too big, versus the amount of resources that were required for the P1 and the P2 queues to keep those within acceptable patient safety limits and service levels. So that's what was meant by the comment there.
Okay.
I missed anything?
Yeah, there's just one thing on a Louisa question about what did you mean in relation to blurred lines of decision making?
Oh, right, sorry, I missed that one. Where was that?
It's in the lessons learned.
In the lessons learned. Oh, I think what it was. We got it right by the end, I think, and it was to do with, as with all things in life, perhaps, there are different ways in which to go about skinning a particular cat. And what we had on Sundays was the two different tactics. So to give an example, and it picks up on Tim's point as well, one of the things that we often do is use nurse advisors on the front end to stop calls getting into the queue in the first place and to deal with the big peaks. And we had, depending upon who was on duty that day, some people favoured that, although there are arguments against it, which is that you've got the queue is building through the nurse advisors, the health advisors taking calls, and then there are other schools of thoughts that said nurse advisors should be kept just to do the clinical assessments piece. Okay, so where the blurred lines of responsibility came was whose judgment call was it as to which of those two tactics we should take at any particular time, and through doing it we sorted that out, and by the end of this period and still now the working relationship between operations and clinical it has been absolutely first class, through us properly understanding and looking at each issue from a multitude of different angles. Rather than just a clinical safety or just a performance perspective, we looked at it in the round by the end. And I don't know if there's anything you want to comment on that.
No, just exactly that. Throughout all the decision making, and some of it was very most of it was very proactive. The clinical and operations were side by side and looking at what was the best experience for the patient, as well as what was the most safety route we needed to take in order to deliver the service to the whole of the population that was seeking clinical advance.
Thank you, Trish. And thanks, Renette, for dealing with all of those.
Very good answers.
Yeah, very reassuring. I think we have a sense that there was an enormous pressure and a volume that hadn't been planned for, and the actions that you put in place and the responses of the clinical and operations coming together seems to have been, really exemplary.
Can I then, maybe want to, on behalf of the board, just thank the staff for it's been a real Herculean effort, not only over Christmas and New Year, and I think that has been a contributor to the high levels of sickness as well. One of my colleagues said going into a call centre was a bit like going into a sanatorium. There were so many people with sore throats and coughs and colds. I don't know if you saw that, Tim, when you went in over Christmas.
All very healthy, the ones
good in Ferndown, that's good. It's like, but the staff really stepped up to the plate, and I think we've got a lot to be grateful for. It could have been a lot worse if we hadn't have seen that response.
Thank you. Nick, you just wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to round it off really.
Yeah.
Completely agree with what Renette has just said, and indeed I wrote to staff to say that just after New Year. I think what comes across is that Renette and her colleagues, Tricia and others, dealing with a really very complex web of interrelated factors, but very, very actively managing this situation. You will have gathered that we had some national media coverage just before Christmas on the 23rd. I think it was important that NHS Direct, in terms of our reputation, that we were seen to be responsive to that media, and the line that we took, which I think is absolutely right and borne out by events, was, first of all, let us not forget we were dealing with the coldest December in very many years, and it takes a very small proportion of people to decide that they don't want to venture out onto a slippery pavement in, minus 12 in Surrey or whatever it was, or minus 15 in Yorkshire, that they're going to pick up the phone instead. That we consistently met our standards for dealing with the highest priority patients. So there is no question that we were not distracted by should we be dealing with this target or that target. We were very clear, and that's what happened. And that's the approach. And as it's turned out, we actually dealt with more patients if you include all those who went onto the web. So I think it was tough, but very actively managed.
Thank you, Nick. Okay, I'm hoping that we can get through the suite of performance reports quite quickly. I suspect we might want to dwell a bit on the sickness, but Trevor Smith, there you go. Can I put us in your hands to canter us through the performance?
Thank you, Chair. In view of the discussions we've already had, I was just going to give you the key headlines from the finance report.
Yes, please do that.
For the month. Financial performance remains strong. The in-month deficit is accounted for by the planned return of funds to the Strategic Health Authority. Year-to-date position is a surplus of £2.4 million, and we have an anticipated forecast outturn of £500,000. Our cash position has improved, a combination of better debtor management, where we've been working to improve locally commissioned service, invoicing and settlement, but also support we gave to the Strategic Health Authority, who wish to place some cash with us in month 9. Our results are now subject to audit, and it will be reviewed by the NEO with their interim audit at the end of February.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions on the finances? No, let's move along then. So, Roger, you gave us a paper on sickness, which I'm sure we've read.
There's just two things I'd like to add, if I may, Chair. One is that I'm relatively happy to report that sickness is tumbling week by week at the moment as quickly as it climbed towards the end of the year, and certainly between week 1 and week 2 in January it fell by 2%, and in between weeks 2 and 3 by 1.5%, so that we're back into a high but not unmanageable numbers. The only other thing I'd want to add to the report is that I'm a member of what's called the Borman Reference Group, which is a group, a pan-NHS group looking at health and well-being, and the issue of flu vaccinations for NHS staff is a wide one. And there is a very low take-up across the NHS of flu vaccinations by NHS staff. The NHS employers did produce some information in their 7th of January bulletin, which was the 12 myths of flu vaccinations, which we put on our intranet and put a link out to people in Newsshot. So this is a wide problem, and whilst we may want to find a different way of approaching it, it's certainly one that is shared across the NHS, I think, for those colleagues who work elsewhere. So I just wanted to add those two things.
Thank you.